The 2000s were a strange, vicious decade for horror. The genre broke open in every direction at once, with filmmakers dragging audiences into new territory. These are 9 films that defined the decade, pushed every boundary they could find, and left a permanent scar on the genre that hasn't faded 20 years later. 28 Days Later, 2002. Danny Boyle shot 28 Days Later on a Canon XL1, a $4,000 consumer-grade camcorder you could buy at any electronics store. The decision was partly financial and partly instinctive. He wanted the footage to feel like a documentary, raw, grainy, and unstable in a way that 35mm never could. He understood that the camera's limitations would force a style that matched the chaos on screen, and it turned out to be one of the smartest production decisions in modern horror. The story follows a man named Jim, played by then unknown Cillian Murphy, who wakes from a coma in an abandoned London hospital to find the city completely empty. A rage virus has swept through the population, and what's left of humanity is either dead, infected, or running. The opening sequence, Murphy walking alone through the streets of central London, was filmed at dawn, with no CGI and no budget to close roads. September 11th happened during the middle of filming, and Boyle later said they could never have gotten that freedom in London after it. By the end of production, the film had run out of money entirely and had no ending. The final cut was assembled on almost nothing, and the movie made $84 million worldwide. It also redefined what a zombie movie could be: authentic, furious, and terrifyingly alive. Battle Royale, 2000. Kinji Fukasaku was 70 years old when he made this film, and he made it because the novel it was based on reminded him of being 15. During World War II, his school class was drafted to work in a munitions factory and came under artillery fire. The children couldn't escape, so they dove under each other for cover. Fukasaku survived, but many did not. His job was to dispose the remains of his own classmates, and he realized what he was taught in school about World War II was a pack of lies. He developed a burning hatred of adults that he maintained for a long time afterwards. The story is about a class of junior high school students who are drugged, transported to an island, fitted with explosive collars, and told that they have 3 days to battle each other until one person remains. 6,000 actors auditioned for the film, and 800 made the shortlist, until Fukasaku cast his final 42. The film inspired The Hunger Games, Squid Game, and gave its name to an entire video game genre. Fukasaku started shooting the sequel, Battle Royale 2: Requiem, but died of cancer before he could finish it. His son, Kenta, completed the movie in 2003. American Psycho, 2000. Christian Bale based Patrick Bateman entirely on watching Tom Cruise on David Letterman. What he saw was, in his words, an intense friendliness with nothing behind the eyes, and he built one of the most convincing performances of a psychopath around that observation. Based on the Bret Easton Ellis novel from 1991, it was notorious for its graphic descriptions of torture and murder.
I want to stab you to death and then play around with your blood.
The supporting cast includes Willem Dafoe, Jared Leto, Reese Witherspoon, Chloe Sevigny, and Josh Lucas, all playing various shades of hollow. Director Mary Harron shot it deliberately crisp and bright, and her approach was influenced by Mario Bava's 1970 giallo film Hatchet for the Honeymoon, a film about a killer driven by self-discovery rather than psychology. That distinction mattered to her. She rejected suggestions to explore Bateman's backstory or family history entirely, saying a clear psychological explanation was of no interest to her. As far as she was concerned, Bateman wasn't a product of his environment or his trauma. He was simply a monster. That refusal to explain him is what makes the film so uncomfortable and so darkly funny. The Ring, 2002. A remake of a 1998 Japanese film, Gore Verbinski was inspired to remake it after being sent a VHS, which he described as intriguing and pulp. So much so that he went into production without a completed script. The cursed tape itself took weeks to build, with Verbinski assembling it from practical in-camera effects rather than digital trickery, because he wanted it to feel like something someone had filmed and buried. Hideo Nakata, who directed the 1998 Japanese original, later said Verbinski's version captured the atmosphere of dread better than his own film did, which is not something remake directors typically hear from the person they're remaking. The Ring was a huge hit, pulling in $250 million worldwide on a $48 million budget, and effectively opening the floodgates for the Japanese horror remake boom that produced The Grudge, Dark Water, Pulse, and One Missed Call. What separates The Ring from everything that followed is how little it relies on jump scares. The horror is in the waiting, the quiet buildup of a week ticking down, and a final image that lodges in your head, whether you want it there or not. Dawn of the Dead, 2004. Zack Snyder's feature debut arrived with a degree of difficulty most first-time filmmakers would run from. Remake a beloved George Romero classic, work from a script by James Gunn, the guy best known at the time for writing Scooby-Doo, and try not to get eaten alive by a fan base that was openly hostile to the entire project before a single frame was shot. What Snyder and Gunn delivered was less a remake than a reinvention. A Milwaukee nurse escapes her suburban neighborhood as it collapses into chaos. The opening 10 minutes are considered some of the strongest horror filmmaking of the decade, dropping the audience into the collapse with almost no setup and cutting to a title sequence scored to Johnny Cash's
When the Man Comes Back.
That intercuts news footage with zombie attacks to devastating effect. Snyder's big creative swing was the running zombies, a decision George Romero publicly hated, but that gave the film its frantic, cornered animal energy. Sarah Polley, Ving Rhames, and Mekhi Phifer round out the cast, with actors from the 1978 original showing up in small cameos that feel like passing torches. Made for $26 million and pulling in over $102 million worldwide, it effectively launched Snyder's career and, alongside 28 Days Later 2 years earlier, rewrote where zombie movies were heading in the 21st century. Final Destination, 2000. Final Destination is one of the rare horror premises so clean you can describe it in a sentence, which is probably why the franchise is still going 25 years later. Devon Sawa is a high school senior who has a premonition that Flight 180 to Paris will explode on takeoff. He loses it in the terminal and gets himself and 6 others kicked off the plane moments before it happens. Death, as it turns out, does not appreciate being cheated, and spends the rest of the film picking off the survivors in the exact order they were meant to die. There is no masked killer, no monster, no supernatural entity you can point a camera at. The antagonist is causality itself, turning a leaking toilet or a loose screw into the most frightening thing in the room. James Wong made his directorial debut here, working from a script he co-wrote with Glenn Morgan. Tony Todd shows up as a mortician named Bloodworth to explain how death's design works, and casting the Candyman himself was a smart shortcut. Final Destination did what the best horror premises do. It found a fear that didn't need a villain, and that paranoia is what keeps the film watchable 2 decades later, long after the teen horror wave it arrived on had burned out. Saw, 2004. Saw arrived in October 2004 and looked nothing like anything else in theaters at the time. 2 men wake up chained to opposite ends of a filthy industrial bathroom with a corpse between them, a hacksaw that won't cut through chain but will cut through bone, and a set of tapes explaining that one of them has to kill the other before time runs out. Cary Elwes plays a doctor with a family and a secret. Lee Winnell plays a photographer who has no idea why he's there, and the puzzle of how they ended up in that room becomes the spine of the entire film. The jigsaw killer lets his victims destroy themselves trying to escape. James Wan directed it, and Winnell wrote the screenplay. And the feature was filmed in just 18 days on a shoestring budget. The bathroom was the only set built from scratch, and Wan only got a couple of takes per actor before moving on. It was a massive success at the box office, pulling in over $100 million worldwide, and launching one of the most profitable horror franchises in history, with a new sequel arriving every Halloween for the next 6 years straight. It also got lumped into the torture porn label that dominated the mid-2000s, which always slightly misread the film. The original Saw is less interested in the gore than in the architecture of the traps. Jigsaw believes he is helping people, and the movie is sharp enough to let you sit with how disturbing that actually is. Let the Right One In. 2008. Thomas Alfredsson's 2008 Swedish film is a coming-of-age vampire story, a slow burn meditation on loneliness, all happening at the same time in a housing estate where the sun barely rises. A bullied 12-year-old boy lives in a snowbound Stockholm housing estate in 1982, spending his evenings stabbing trees and collecting newspaper clippings about murders. A girl moves into the apartment next door with an older man who is not her father, and she only comes out at night. The friendship that develops between them is tender, strange, and genuinely moving, which makes the gradual realization of what she actually is that much more devastating. Alfredsson shot the film like a drama rather than a horror movie, with long, static takes and minimal score, which makes the sudden bursts of violence hit harder than jump scares would. The snow-covered concrete of the suburban setting does enormous work, turning every exterior into a landscape of muffled silence that a sudden act of violence can shatter. The movie became one of the most acclaimed genre films of the decade, with Matt Reeves directing an English-language remake called Let Me In just 2 years later. The Swedish original remains the definitive version, partly because the winter landscape feels genuinely foreign to most viewers, and partly because of the two most incredible child performances in modern horror. The Others, 2001. The Others is one of the most effective ghost stories of the 2000s, and it's Nicole Kidman's show from the first frame. She plays Grace, a devout Catholic mother living in a vast country estate on the island of Jersey at the end of World War II, waiting for a husband who may never return home. She's raising 2 children who suffer from a rare photosensitivity that means the house must be kept in permanent shadow. When 3 new servants arrive looking for work, and strange sounds begin echoing through the halls, Grace becomes convinced the house is haunted. Alejandro Amenabar wrote, directed, and composed the score himself at just 28 years old, his first English-language feature after the Spanish-language success of Thesis and Open Your Eyes. He used Spain for the exteriors and built the interiors on soundstages in Madrid to allow precise control over every light source. Kidman signed on during the collapse of her marriage to Tom Cruise, who stayed on as a producer through his company Cruise Wagner Productions, and her performance anchors the entire movie. It became one of the most profitable horror movies of the decade, grossing over $209 million worldwide on just a $17 million budget. It trusts the audience to sit in quiet rooms, to listen for what isn't there, and to follow a mother whose faith is slowly and mercilessly dismantled.